So welcome everybody to today's webinar on harnessing the cloud without compromising your information security. My name is Ross Spelman. I'm head of cloud assurance here at Espion. We're an information security company, and my department is focused primarily on cloud security and giving customers the understanding and the competence they need to operate in cloud environments. I'm here today with Nigel Hawthorn, who's Marketing Director of EMEA with SkyHigh Networks. Nigel will be talking today on the EU Data Protection Act and how it will affect both traditional and cloud environments, and how innovative tools like SkyHigh and consultancy expertise that Espion provide can help customers in their cloud journey. So I'll begin by introducing Nigel, and I'll let Nigel take the lead and present on EU data protection.
Okay, thank you very much, Ross, and thanks everybody for spending your time with us today. And if you don't know much about SkyHigh Networks, we're a company who can help you give visibility and understanding of the cloud services that your users are using, both sanctioned IT and shadow IT, and then provide additional security measures around the cloud services that you want your users to access so that they can be more productive and you keep data safe and secure. What I want to talk about today mainly is the European data protection legislation, how that should affect your data in the cloud, the things that you need to do to make sure that you are conforming to the regulations. And then I'll pass back to Ross and we can talk about and make clearer the risks that are involved and how we can all move forward together to provide cloud assurance. So, EU data protection and the cloud. And what I'll start with is that many of the slides that I'll be using that are talking specifically about the EU data protection legislation are taking information from the recently published ebook that we've got available, and therefore there's more places to go to find out more information. But let's just start at the top. Can cloud and data protection actually ever be friends? Or, unfortunately, is it always going to be a fairly awkward relationship where the two sides are not really seeing the world in quite the same way? Well, I think that if we are doing this properly, they can be friends. In fact, they can work together to make sure that users are getting access to the services that they need in a safe and secure way. And the dilemma that we're living with today is that our users are accessing many services. Perhaps off the cuff they will all of a sudden start to sign up for a new service and start putting data in it without necessarily talking to IT or legal or getting approval for it. So what we find in most organizations is that the access to cloud services can be split into two or perhaps even three groups. On the right hand side you can see here sanctioned IT services, services that the organization has signed a contract for, that everybody knows should be used, that they've worked out terms and conditions with the supplier, and it's a sanctioned IT service provided by the corporation to the individuals. Perhaps one of the most famous ones here would be Salesforce, used by many organizations for customer relationship management. For those technologies, what IT and the corporation needs is to make sure that the data is being kept safe and secure, that you're fully complying with all regulatory requirements, both national and within your vertical market, and that you are able to look and see whether any devices have been compromised, any users are performing strange, anomalous activities that might indicate a flight risk, or somebody who is trying to take data from the organization. But much bigger than the number of sanctioned IT services are the number of shadow IT services. Shadow IT, a phrase meaning that the individuals have signed up to access these services without getting full approval from the central IT functions. It may well be a line of business who's decided that it needs a service for its team, or it may be an individual who has just decided, I want to back up my PC across the cloud, or I want to use this particular cloud service because it gives me something that I don't think I'm getting from the Sanctions services. With these, the first thing we need is visibility. What is going on? How many services are my users accessing, and what information are they putting up there? And that can be both a positive thing and a negative thing. If you were to get somebody to give you a consultancy report, as Espion can do, for example, on the visibility into the cloud services, that might tell you which services your users want to access. And you could make a decision that says, okay, I see that there's really a need for this. Let's look at the different suppliers and provide the service that the organization needs. But it can also be looking at risk, looking at the danger points when users were signing up to cloud services and putting data there, sharing information. We need to understand that risk, the risk to the business of losing intellectual property, the problems that can come from the bad publicity of losing customer data, the possibility of losing your very valuable intellectual property in the organization, and ensuring that you're complying with the data protection laws, which we'll be talking about in a moment. And then also looking at possible threats, exfiltration events that might indicate a security breach. We've had, as an example, a PC that was generating lots of YouTube videos, and it was uploading those, but actually it was trying to extract information because within the video was embedded some of the data that the PC could get access to. So this is where we are right now. This is the dilemma of using the cloud. The cloud can be incredibly valuable to you and provide services that are very innovative, that are easy to use, make the organization more agile, perhaps reduce costs, but it comes with, unfortunately, a level of risk that we need to identify and then try to address. So here's a question for you. How many services do you think your users are using? How many cloud services are there that are used by one department, another department, individual users? And what we find is that whatever number you think your users are using, in fact, they're probably using 10 times as many. We actually produce a report every quarter that shows people the cloud traffic that we're seeing from our customers. This isn't a survey, this isn't somebody answering some questions, but actually real-life data from our customers around the world and also within Europe. So the latest reports that just looked at traffic from European organizations, one of the graphs in there is showing the average number of cloud services in use. So have you thought of the answer to my question, how many cloud services are you using? Well, we've got a trend because we've been doing this report now for a while, and at the beginning of 2014, the average number of cloud services in use was 588 per organization. Maybe that is a higher number than you thought. But it's gone up since then, 614, 724, and now in the latest report, we found that the average number of cloud services in use in a large organization is 782. And if you think that it's not that many in your organization, Espion can come and actually tell you how many it is. They can provide a report based on a couple of weeks of logs of your traffic and just tell you what is going on. And to scare you further, we found a organization in the financial services industry that had more than 3,000 cloud services in use in its organization. So that cloud adoption and risk report is available to download from our website. Feel free to go and look at it, use it. I hope that it provides some useful information for you. It's about 20 pages. It's got a number of other reports on there, the average number of services in use by an individual, how much data going outside the organization seems to hold commercial in confidence information, the fastest growing web services, etc. So hopefully a useful addition to the sort of information that you might need to run your business. But as Ross said, really the main focus of today is EU data protection and how it affects cloud data. So as Ross said, the main part of this presentation today, though, is EU data protection. and how it might affect cloud data. Some of the thoughts that I want to put in your head that it'd be worthwhile looking at to make sure that you are conforming to the EU data protection regulations. Let's just start with a bit of background. The words directive and regulation often get used, and sometimes interchangeably. So I think it's worthwhile knowing the way the EU works, what these regulations and directives are, and where we are right now with data protection. So an EU directive, whatever the subject is a law that is passed at the EU but then needs to be enacted by the individual countries. So every country government then takes that and writes their own interpretation. They may do that quickly, it may take them some time, but what this means is you have slightly different policies and slightly different enforcement in each country. And so with 28 countries in the EU, you may find you've got slightly different rules and regulations to conform to, which of course is difficult if you've got a patchwork of slightly different but overlapping requirements. And that's where we are right now. Data protection is a directive. But when the EU write a regulation, that becomes law automatically across all 28 countries. It's common, and that makes life a lot easier from a management point of view because you know what it is that you are having to conform to. And the new regulation for data protection is under discussion. You can go on the EU website and read all of the drafts, the recommended changes that lobbyists have made, and the expectation is that the regulation will be published somewhere near the end of this year and implemented in 2016. As a bit of background, the EU has really been very strong on data protection for many years. The first directive was published in 1995, and in the UK the responsibility to enforce that is given to a body called the Information Commissioner's Office. There's the equivalent in every country. And the ICO website, ico.org.uk, is the place to go to find out how you need to register, what the rules are in the UK. And also they're there to help uphold information rights in the public interest, promote openness, but also they are the body that will investigate anyone who may well have had a data breach and potentially fine people as well. And currently, the maximum fine in the UK for loss of data on UK citizens is £500,000. And that is up from a couple of years ago when the maximum fine was £50,000. So the fine has multiplied by 10, and actually just in the last week or so, the Information Commissioner's Office has fined an insurance firm after they lost 5,000 customer sets of data. And they were fined £175,000. So that's probably, what, €250,000, and that's around £34–35 per record lost. Now, admittedly, this firm really didn't have the right policies, the right procedures, the right technology in place, but it does show that the ICO is taking this very seriously. And of course, not only did they get fined, but this news release is put on the ICO website. It may well be written up in the press and therefore affect your brand image. Let's just go back again and this time look at what is personal data? What is it that I have to keep safe and secure? Well, I think we can probably all agree on some items that are personal data, such as name, address, phone number, your credit card number, your date of birth, but it isn't explicitly defined. There isn't a list of these are the things that are always considered personal data and these are the things that are not. So you might question, what about somebody's work email address? What about the IP address of the computer? That can identify the individual if they're working from home. What about your own internal account numbers or codes that you might have for that individual? Well, our recommendation is really to assume that all of this is considered personal data, because the way the regulation is written is data by which an individual can be identified. And certainly in certain countries right now, people are have more tightly written regulations. But with the new directive, I think we need to make the assumption that anything that relates to an individual person, really in any way, should be considered personal data and should be kept safe and secure. And then the last background piece is what is a data controller? So a data controller is anyone who owns and controls and uses the data. So you, as working for organizations, you have got information on your customers, on your suppliers, on your own employees, on prospects, anyone who's come to your website. You are therefore a data controller. Whether that data is kept in a CRM system, whether it's in a marketing database, whether it's on a spreadsheet, you're a data controller, and if you're above a certain size, you should actually register with your legislative body such as the ICO. And the data controller is responsible for all management of that data. That might seem obvious, but the key thing I want to point out here is you can offload a lot of your data, you can outsource management of that data, you can work with third parties, but if they were to lose that data, you are responsible. You are responsible for that data, you can't outsource that. So you really need to look at your data handling processes internally, make sure that you don't have employees who just take data, put it unencrypted on laptops and leave the laptops in the back of a taxi, but also look at the third parties. And by third parties, we include cloud providers. If you were to upload your corporate data into a cloud and then the cloud provider gets hacked, you could be held responsible for that data loss. And then the last piece, the last bullet on here, I think I just want to make a point about, because I think that this is something that perhaps people haven't recognized as much as they should, is that the data should only be used for the purpose it was originally collected. What does that mean? Well, that means if you say to somebody, I would like to have your contact details so that I can contact you and talk about your the technology you've bought from us and give you customer support, then that's what you should use the data for. You should not then take that, use it for some other reason. You certainly shouldn't sell it on to somebody else. Oh, I've got this list of customers. Would you like to buy it? So I think this is going to catch a few people out as the new regulation comes in force, because it is strongly written in the new regulation about having approval from the citizens for use of the data just for one or two requirements. Okay, let's just reinforce one of those. So in the UK there's an ISP called TalkTalk, and their customer data was stolen actually last year, though they only told their customers at the end of February in 2015. And with this, they said that the data was lost through a third party. So it just reinforces the point that TalkTalk are the people whose name is on the press release, who got written about in the lots of news organizations, even though the information they believe was leaked out through a third party that they had a relationship with. So you really need to look at the data handling policies and technology that your third parties are using. Okay, let's move on to the regulation. So the new regulation, there's a draft available right now. It's been going through draft stages for a while. It's expected to be published in the summer or maybe the autumn of this year and implemented in 2016 or possibly the beginning of 2017. Actually, that's not terribly far away. And the draft has had a number of people who have recommended changes to it. However, the drafts haven't changed a huge amount, even though people have recommended amendments. And so we believe that the final report is likely to be, or the final regulation is likely to be pretty close to the draft that's available now. And so it's never too early to start planning. And to compare it with the directive that was published in 1995. Today, the regulation looks more prescriptive. It's widening the scope that you need to take into account. And the expectation is that it will be published in the next few months, agreed by perhaps the end of this year, 2015, or the beginning of next, and implemented in 2016 or possibly 2017. The draft of the regulation is more prescriptive than the directive that was written in 1995. It widens the scope of what you have to do. There's a heavier compliance burden. There's new obligations on what are called data processors. So the data processor, somebody who is the third party who works with you, is now jointly liable together with the data controller. So if you're a cloud provider or if you're outside the EU and you thought up until now you didn't need to worry about the data protection directive, you really should be concerned about the data protection regulation. And it affects anyone who has access to data on the EU citizens. And so you can't argue when the new regulation comes out that you are, for instance, a US-based organization, and so it doesn't matter what you do with the data of EU citizens. You are also liable. The sanctions themselves are very much tougher. Now, I'm sure that will be something that's being lobbied hard to change, but they go up to potentially 5% of global revenue. And as I said earlier, because it's a regulation, there'll be a common implementation across all 28 countries. And our recommendation is keep watching, keep looking for updates to this. I see news articles coming out every day about EU data protection regulation, but at the point that it is published, it really is time for you to get some professional advice on the implications for your business to ensure that you can deliver the access to content that you want for your users, but make sure that you are not falling foul of the data protection regulations at the same time. So you need to keep, it might sound obvious, but you need to tell them at the you gather the data, what you're going to use it for. You need to get approval from those users that you can gather that data, and actually you then need to remind them, you need to document the approval that you have got to make sure that if anyone complains about the fact that you're using their data, you're able to give an audit trail of when they came to you and the approval that they gave. And there's this phrase that you must meet an individual's reasonable expectations of data safety. So again, that's not completely defined, and of course it never will be, but it's trying to ensure that whatever a reasonable citizen would expect is being implemented by your organization, both technology-wise, process, procedure, individual, training, etc., to ensure that data is being kept safe and secure. And it's clear from the fines that have been levied on people who have lost data over the last few years that if you have good policies and procedures and it was an error that caused data to be lost, the fine will be a lot lower than if you've got no policies and procedures at all. So you should have policies available there that are clear, well-defined, etc. But there's a good and interesting phrase in there that says that if data has been tokenized or pseudonymized, processing is assumed or presumed to meet the individual's reasonable expectations. So I won't say that this is a get-out, but it's certainly a very positive point that if you were to encrypt or tokenize data, and we would recommend keeping your encryption key on-premise, for instance. So if you encrypt or tokenize data before putting it in the cloud or before sharing it with a third party, then if data was ever lost, the good news is, of course, that somebody can't then decrypt that and go back to the original data, and it's assumed that that is something that's very positive by the regulator, that is making sure you're keeping the data safe and secure. So our recommendation is to look into this. Look at the ability to encrypt or tokenize data before uploading it to the cloud, and if you keep the keys on premise, then somebody can't get those keys and get access to the encrypted data and decrypt it afterwards. As I said, in today's directive, only the data controller is officially responsible for data protection. But in the new regulation, this responsibility is being extended. It's being extended to data processors. A data processor is not the organization perhaps that the customer is buying from, but someone else who is doing something with that data. It could be your outsourced marketing organization. It could be a call center that you might share information with. It could be any cloud provider that your employees are sharing data on. They can all be considered to be data processors. And as I said, the TalkTalk example in the UK, or the Target example, the US retailer Target, who lost a lot of data in 2014, that also was lost through a problem with a third-party supplier. This third-party supplier was a pretty small organization. They were hacked, but then they had a link from their network into the Target network, and the criminals managed to exfiltrate data from the Target network through that third party. So our recommendation here is confirm with all cloud providers and any third party that you might be working with that they understand their responsibility under the EU data protection regulation, and make sure you have the right to inspect their processes, their procedures, perhaps even advise them on the processes and procedures that you believe are reasonable and required. And then this slide perhaps we could talk about for 2 hours, don't worry, I won't. But transferring data outside the EU is a very large area. It's probably about 4 pages of the book that we've written. And today the directive allows a lot of different ways that an organization can use to share data outside the EU. In fact, an organization, if it believes that a data processor is safe and secure, can just state themselves, I believe they're safe and I want to share information with them. This is being tightened up in the new directive, in the new regulation. So in a new regulation, the data controller cannot decide that a supplier or country is safe. Only the EU Commission can do this. And therefore, you need to make sure that you really are using people who are recognized as safe and secure. One way that organizations have declared themselves to be secure, if they're US-based, is the US government's safe harbor scheme. That really is under a bit of scrutiny after the Snowden NSA revelations, though it does seem that actually those revelations have ensured that the US government is more rigorously checking this. So my assumption is that the safe harbor system will not change, but it's something worth watching. It's a very long subject. So we recommend that you do get the visibility of where the cloud provider or third party is based and where they're keeping the data. And do you have the ability to be kept informed if they move the data somewhere else? So many cloud providers might actually outsource their data storage to another organization. Even though their HQ may be in Germany, for example, what if, for commercial reasons, they all of a sudden decide to move the data to a country that you're not convinced has as good security as you would like? Well, it's worthwhile, I think, getting some help, advice, maybe legal advice, to see what you can have with the contract with your third parties to ensure that you know both where their headquarters is, things like if there's a legal challenge, what will be the jurisdiction of the law? Is it where you're based or is it where they're based? And where is the data being kept? And even today, individuals can ask you for access to their data to see what it is that you have about them. And each country in their implementation of today's directive, has a slightly different rule about how quickly you need to respond. In the UK, you need to respond within 40 days. In the new regulation, this will be harmonized, and the proposal right now in the draft is to reduce the time to respond to 20 days. Also in the new regulation, users can demand erasure from your systems. And let me just give you a quick example here. That's perhaps more difficult than you might think. What if you have a sales CRM system, a marketing database, a financial transactions database, a customer support database, and they've all got information on a particular individual who says, I want to be erased from your systems? How are you going to put together the process to respond to that to make sure that you are deleting somebody from all of those systems? And actually, some of these systems make life difficult to erase things. I had an issue a couple of companies ago where somebody said to me they wanted to be erased from our systems, but actually all of the systems were talking to each other and syncing. As soon as I erased somebody from one of the databases, one of the others noticed that it wasn't there anymore and went and synced it back. So you have to make sure, and let's do some testing of trying to add the customer to all of the systems and then removing it again. I'm sure it's probably something that Espion can help advise you on. And you also need to inform users and authorities of the data loss. And that might seem obvious, but actually it's not 100% guaranteed that you have to do this in today's directive. It rather depends on the country implementations. The regulation will probably harmonize this with a proposal of telling the regulator within 72 hours. And you notice there that last sentence, and users must be informed unless the data was encrypted or tokenized. So this goes back to the point I made earlier. If you start encrypting and tokenizing data, then actually that can help you conform to these standards and reduce the pain if there is a data breach in the future. So again, it's time to define your process, work out how you would tell the regulator if you believe a data breach has happened, and consider tokenizing or encrypting the data before uploading into the cloud. I will just comment from a personal point of view that I haven't seen in the regulation a statement on how quickly you need to inform the users that their data has been lost or you think it's been lost. I think that may well come into the regulation between now and it being published, so it needs to be watched, and we need to work out just what is appropriate in each of our circumstances. How quickly should you be telling the users so that they can take any remedial action they might need to take? And right now, there are 28 different regulators in the 28 different countries, and they all work differently. Some of them, like the ICO in the UK, will update their website and issue a press release whenever they find somebody. Other countries, they don't. But probably the number one bullet in here is the regulation is expected to increase the fines. No doubt this is something that people are lobbying hard to get to a number that they feel comfortable with, but the current proposal is to go up to 5% of global turnover. 5% of global turnover. There is no question about it. The EU is deadly serious about data protection, and this should make everybody sit up and think, am I doing the right things? Because the risks of getting it wrong are very large indeed. And the new regulation also allows users to claim damages, which, as far as I'm aware, in the current directive has only been implemented in one country. In the new regulation, users can claim damages, including what's called collective redress, which is rather like the US, I'm going to have to pause because I can't remember.
Yeah, sure. It's okay.
Class action lawsuit. Yeah. So the regulation allows users to claim damages, including what is called collective redress, which is rather like the US. What did I say? I've just forgotten it. Class action lawsuit. Right, let's start that again. Sorry, everybody. And the regulation introduces an explicit rule about users being able to claim damages if their data is lost, including what's called collective redress, which is rather like a US class action lawsuit. So you need to think that you really don't want to be dragged through the courts and have even more publicity and have to pay even more money out to the individual users whose data might be lost. But that's something that is definitely coming. So ensure, of course, senior management understand the possible maximum fines, the possible problems of getting things wrong. And I think we've got to remember that actually brand image can be negatively impacted greatly. And Target, Sony, maybe to a lesser extent TalkTalk at the moment, have all had negative brand image because of the data that they have lost inside their organization. So pulling all of these things together, I think step one is audit the current cloud services. Just what are your users accessing and what are they doing with those cloud services today? Let's set a baseline. Let's get somebody in. Espion can do this as an example. They can provide a consultancy service where they will look at the cloud services being used. They can give you a risk report. They can give you a report on something like 50 different risks for each cloud service. Is this a high-risk service or a low-risk service, and why? You can then, once you've got that information, start putting together your plans. Which of those services are you happy with? Which do you want to embrace as a company? Which of those services are you very unhappy with? And you want to ensure that your users will stop using them. This can be integrated with your current firewall and proxy technology. So you can use the techniques that your users are used to either block access to certain services or provide coaching pages that might say, well, yeah, this is a cloud provider we'd rather you didn't use. There's another one, and this is the link, that is actually supported by the organization. And this looks at various different risk factors, and you can see some of them listed here. I won't go through all of them, but there's more than just technology involved here. Legal risk. Who owns the intellectual property if you were to upload information to the cloud? You might think that's obvious, but actually some cloud providers say in their terms and conditions, anything uploaded to our cloud service now belongs to us. If there's a dispute, where is that resolved? If you were to stop using a cloud service, can you force them to delete that information? So there are lots of different questions, and actually you probably need to have lots of different people from different departments inside your organization jointly look at the current cloud services and look at this risk report to try to give you cloud assurance, to try to make sure that you know that the cloud services that your users are using are built for business and are able to provide the services that you want in a safe and secure manner. Once you've got that, let's define the acceptable services for the organization, let's train the users and advise them on which ones to use, and enforce that ruling to ensure that the users don't then sign up with other services. What we actually find is this isn't a one-off activity, that the number of new services coming online every day is fairly large. Users keep finding new services and signing up for them. So it's something that it's probably worth having as an ongoing risk assessment to make sure that you're not only safe and secure today, but safe and secure tomorrow. And many of the things that I have talked about in the last few slides are available in this EU data protection legislation document, this primer that's available to you to download free of charge to help you navigate your way through where the data protection rules are now and where we believe they're going. So I hope that that's a useful document for you. We wrote it in conjunction with a lawyer from DMH Stallard. I wanted to make sure that we did that because I wanted to have a lawyer by my side making sure that everything that we write is is true and stands up to scrutiny. And so I think that this is a very useful document, and I hope that you find it useful to try to ensure that you are enabling your users to use the flexibility of cloud services within a safe way. SkyHigh service can give you a view on the cloud services that your users are using. A risk report that is based on the traffic that we can see into and out of your organization. And here is a screen from a report that we did for a large UK-based organization where we found 1,682 different cloud services. Of those, you can see 118 were considered by us as being high risk. High risk because the intellectual property belonged to the cloud service provider, or high risk because they were hosted in a country that has very little data protection legislation, or high risk because we'd seen them being victims of hacking attacks before, or one of many other different reasons. When we look at the amount of data going into those high-risk services, for this particular organization we found 118 gigabytes of data was transferred in a 2-week period to those high-risk services. But as you can see, there were nearly 750,000 requests to those services, and that even though this organization had firewalls and proxies, that actually most of the requests to the high-risk services were being allowed. So we can provide this sort of risk report to make sure that our customers can see what's going on their network and whether or not there are high-risk services that their employees are looking at. And then if we go into a little more detail here, then we can show for each of those services our risk rating, the organization, the service name, the category of the cloud service, the number of requests to it, the amount of traffic that's being pushed out to that service, the amount of traffic coming in. And you can see here as this example at the top, Sprinkler has been used by only 11 users on the right-hand side, but those 11 users have uploaded 3.1 gigabytes of data. And on the right-hand side, you see here the column allowed, denied, but actually 100% of the requests to that service were allowed through the proxies or firewalls. You can see that there's a lot of different services, a lot of different categories with fairly high-risk services, and that you can see that the high-risk services fall into a number of different categories, and by being able to see this and drill down into the individual services, you can then decide to block those services or educate users about the risks of using those for sharing confidential or proprietary information. We can also report on how many cloud services have been used that have been known to be used for malware distribution, or how many have in their terms and conditions that intellectual property of any data uploaded belongs to the cloud service provider. Some of them, unfortunately, in this report were on the US notorious markets list, so been known for distributing pirated content, for example, or services that allow people to log in anonymously. So somebody might log in from your organization and upload information, and then someone else logs in anonymously to that. A common threat vector, perhaps for malware coming into the organization or information going out of your organization and then being lost. So SkyHigh can help shine a light on the shadow IT services, those that are potentially high risk, and help you to block those using your existing infrastructure, and also educate users on which services they should use and which services they shouldn't. We can also look at strange user activity, anomalous user activity as it's called here. So the top one, for instance, a user that is doing constant backups to iBackup. If you've got a backup service within your organization, why are users signing up for something else? Why has a user made 66,000 requests to Flickr but not accessed any other service? Does this indicate that actually their device has been compromised, that maybe there's a virus on there that is looking at data within the organization and encrypting it within a Flickr picture and then uploading it to the cloud? So these examples can look at and show you whether a user is doing something strange. Another one that I can think of that's not on the slide is maybe there's a user who's been with the company for a long time. They access your CRM system, and typically they will download 1 or 2 customer contact details each day before they go to meetings. All of a sudden they download 500 customer records, and then a few minutes later they upload a big file, an Excel file, to one of the shared file services. Does that indicate a problem with that employee? Is that employee potentially a flight risk to leave your company and join a competitor? These sorts of things, the individual requests, are all legitimate. It is legitimate that that user accesses your CRM system. It is legitimate that that user shares information in the cloud, perhaps. But when you look at the whole trend, you can see that something strange is going on, something definitely worth investigating. And then, changing gear a little bit, I wanted to point out an example of one of the other issues of using the cloud. You've perhaps had 10 or 15 years to be able to put together the security systems for your on-premise computing. You've got DLP systems that are looking at your email traffic. They're looking at your shared servers within your intranet. But all of a sudden you sign up to a cloud service and that's gone. Well, one of the great things that SkyHigh can help you do is to look at data that's being uploaded to the cloud and incorporate the data leak prevention policies that you already have inside your organization. As a user uploads a file, we can take that, we can pass it to the DLP solution, we can ask it to perform its functions, and then we can allow it, or we can delete it, we can tombstone it, we can inform management if that's the policy that's already there. So it's really great, I think, to be able to take the technologies that you've been used to, you've set up and run for many years, and incorporate cloud within the traffic that you are looking at for DLP and other things. And the other thing you'll see here is that you may choose to add encryption to the traffic that you're uploading. One of the important trends nowadays is to use encryption but keep the keys on-premise, because that way, even if somebody was to get access to the data, or maybe even a government agency wants to get access to that data, they can't decrypt that data without the keys that are kept on-premise inside your organization. So one of the really useful things, I think, is to find out exactly what's going on your network right now. To get a cloud discovery and risk assessment report, and this can be delivered by Espion. They can work with you to look at your logs to make sure that they're anonymized, so that nobody's looking at any information on individual usernames, for example, but then look at the cloud access that is being requested by your users.
So thank you very much, Nigel. A very informative presentation. And just to recap, my name is Ross Spelman. I'm Head of Cloud Assurance here at Espion, an information security specialist company, and my area, I deal with the area of cloud assurance services and cloud security in general. So again, when we talk about cloud security and cloud implementations, we're really talking about success factors and about how to make sure your cloud implementations are successful. Underneath everything is stakeholder engagement. Stakeholders in cloud implementations need to be included from the very outset. So a cloud implementation can affect all areas of the organization, from HR to legal and right down through the chain. So it's all about including these business units and aligning them with IT to provide a successful cloud implementation. You're looking at customer needs versus wants, defining applications and services from the outset, creating solid business cases that make sense for cloud environments, looking at surveys and questionnaires around responses to what business units need and require, defining the right capabilities, and defining SLAs and quality of service tiers. We need to look at rating and metering and so on. These are all part of the success metrics, but the success factors are really about stakeholder engagement and getting the thumbs up from all the units in the organization that a cloud implementation will affect. When we take a step back and talk about cloud computing, we're really talking about cloud services that fall into the NIST category. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, a non-profit organization from the United States, and they have set out the characteristics for cloud computing as follows: on-demand self-service, ubiquitous network access, location-transparent resource pooling, rapid elasticity, and finally, measured service with pay-per-use. So to step through these, on-demand self-service, as most people are aware of, the cloud is quite open, it's quite available, so you can click on a service, a system, an application in the cloud environment and it's spun up instantly, and it's on demand for when a user needs it. Use cases where this could be beneficial to an organization might be a development house which needs to spin up an environment for testing immediately, and rather than going out and speccing out and procuring a server to meet this demand, simply log onto your cloud infrastructure or platform as a service and spin up what you need when you need it. The second is ubiquitous network access. So this is looking at accessing from anywhere. So cloud, by its very nature, it's user access through the internet. So there's no special VPN, there's no special remote desktop client required. Everybody has access to the internet nowadays, therefore everybody is able to utilize cloud services. So there are no limitations to who can access what with regard to the ingress points and egress points from the cloud. So then we look at location transparent resource pooling. This is pooling all of your available assets to provide them as one. So it's economies of scale. In a private cloud environment, you can have your cloud assets actually hosted in a number of different locations, and you would pool them and present them all as one single logical resource. Next, we talk about rapid elasticity. So rapid elasticity has been able to scale up and scale down instantly. This is incredibly useful for companies with peak and trough loads that don't actually have a steady workload or transaction rate, that their processing spikes peak and low, so the capacity demands and so on will be volatile, they change up and down. And finally, measured pay-per-use is effectively running infrastructure as a service, software as a service, or platform as a service as a service, as it says. So it's just you pay for what you need when you need it. Simplest form is it's a tap of resources available to you that you're charged only for what you use. So again, it's moving from a capital expenditure model to an operational expenditure model, allowing your organization to be much more flexible. These are the benefits, but again, with each of these benefits there are risks. On-demand self-service, you're looking at identity and access management to gain control over that demand for self-service. Just because something's available to spin up doesn't mean you shouldn't step through the business steps and make the business case and set out a clear path to how you actually gain your cloud services. Next, ubiquitous network access. Because you're presenting your infrastructure with an ingress point from anywhere in the world over the internet, it actually opens up new and different risks. Location transparent resource pooling, so you're sharing resources over different geographical jurisdictions, and this can again present a number of risks also. So rapid elasticity causes a risk because if you scale up to meet a demand and don't scale down in the proper manner, proper controls in place, you can end up costing your organization a lot of money. Measured self-service can be a vulnerability or a risk. Measured self-service can be a risk to your organization in that measured services need to be controlled and maintained, and again with the likes of rapid elasticity, on-demand self-service, controlling user access management in these areas is important so that you can measure what you use and make sure the metrics you're gaining from your cloud service provider are accurate. So I suppose the point really is the benefits are there to cloud computing, but there are also risks to each one of them. So when we talk about the benefits and the risks associated, we're really talking about security. So these are risks that are changed and evolved in a cloud environment. So we're still looking at the likes of threats, vulnerabilities, protecting assets and the associating risk to those assets. Step through this from a very conceptually point of view, and these are the ISO definitions. Threats, vulnerabilities, risks and assets are the criteria really around security and information security in traditional environments and cloud environments. An example of a threat is a burglar walking around the car park. An example of a vulnerability is an unlocked office. An example of an asset is what you're trying to protect. So it could be anything from a coffee cup on your desk to a laptop with potentially sensitive information on it. An asset is what we're trying to protect. A threat is anything that can exploit a vulnerability. And a threat is what we're trying to protect against. And a vulnerability is a weakness or gap in a security program that can be exploited by threats to gain unauthorized access to an asset. So again, an asset will have different values. Your laptop on your desk with intellectual property will have high risk and high value attributed to it. A coffee cup on the desk will have a completely different risk, though these are both considered assets of different value. When we consider risk, this is the same principles we apply in a cloud environment. We're thinking about the impact multiplied by the likelihood. The impact being the impact of the loss of that asset or the theft of that asset, and the likelihood being the likelihood that a burglar will attempt to access the building at the same time and exploit the vulnerability. So, to expand a bit more on this, we look at cloud vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities in a cloud environment are changed and evolved. So, the likes of an evolved vulnerability would be the likes of misconfiguration. Business continuity and DR will have changed greatly. Asset ownership has different implications. Same with identity and access management and authorization. And new risks, examples of new risks will be resource capping, resource isolation, key generation, misplaced arbitration, and inaccurate modeling. And these are all new and important vulnerabilities in your cloud environment that you need to get a hold of in order to build in mitigations. Vulnerabilities, as you mentioned earlier on, can be exploited intentionally or accidentally, and therefore damage or destroy an asset. So it's important to understand the implications of the exploitation of these vulnerabilities, and that's really where risk comes in. We hear a lot about risk in the cloud, and there are two real types of risks. There are hypothetical and demonstrated risks in cloud environments. A hypothetical risk is really one that hasn't actually been exploited. So it could be a hypervisor hack, a tenant overlap in storage, rogue administration by a provider. These are hypothetical things that actually can. Demonstrated risks include poor customer practices in coding, the likes of account management, regulatory violation, and so on. To manage risks in the cloud, it's important to understand the SLAs and what the terms and conditions of your cloud service provider are, and roles and responsibilities. And that's important to build out from the outset. When we talk about risks, we're talking about really risks to assets. And asset protection is a key area in cloud security. Again, the vulnerabilities will have much different consequences if exploited in the cloud environment than traditional. So you have to look at them from the outset at the most granular level. You have to look at data, you have to look at processes, you have to look at your technology, and you have to look at the levels of criticality these assets have in your organization, and you also have to classify them to this measure. And this is what a risk assessment is all about. It's about classifying the assets and assigning the correct level of criticality to them, and that's the most important, or one of the most important areas in cloud security. You have to treat the assets as you would in a traditional environment and apply the right classification and priority of these assets before you actually consider moving them to a cloud environment. If you are operating in a cloud environment, it's important to review and step through this process. And this isn't a once-off process. This is an iterative approach that should be done at least annually, as your cloud environment may change, and it's much more volatile than your traditional environment, which you actually have more of a measure of control over. So essentially, you need to secure your assets just as you would in a traditional environment. The issue of cross-border treatment of data assets. Can your organization predict that your data will not cross a border on its way to a cloud server, and so on? So you need to look at data in transit, at rest, and in process. So if an organization thinks about cloud computing solely from the perspectives of data processing technology and cost reduction or benefits, it may take action that increase the volatility of its data assets and its liability resulting from their compromise. So that's interesting when you look at that in terms of the EU data protection law and the new implications for loss of data. If an organization considers cloud computing from the perspective of data assets and risk management, it is less likely to be disrupted given the nature of the internet. And when we talk about risk assessment and asset protection, we're really looking at the first step in your cloud journey. So a cloud journey is really your roadmap from how you get from your traditional environment securely to a cloud environment. And this can be anything from moving your CRM system from a traditional environment into a cloud environment. So you'd look at your risk assessment, your secure cloud design, intelligent cloud migration, cloud testing and audit, cloud incident response, and cloud service provider assessment. Our cloud journey is defined in stages. The first is a risk assessment, is an evaluation of the risk associated with an organization's assets and the context of the organization itself. So this is the first stage, the classification of assets. Then we looked at the secure cloud design. It's mapping out the design of security controls for the cloud environment to present mitigations for the risks as mentioned. We then look at intelligent cloud migration. It's a secure method to migrate your software platform or infrastructure into a cloud environment in an intelligent way to make sure you've made the correct business decisions and you're getting the most in the most secure way. Next we look at cloud assurance and testing. So simply it's a service designed to test the cloud environment for security and ensure that it is secured to the levels as agreed by the CSP. Cloud Incident Response is a service to help a solid incident response planning for organizations to be able to respond to incidents in the cloud with the same level of assurance as their own infrastructure. And finally, and kind of separately really, the Cloud Service Provider Assessment is a service which CSPs can avail to see how aligned they are to the Cloud Security Alliance's Cloud Control Matrix and audited to the level of the STAR certification. But to step through in a little bit more of a phased approach, the risk assessment, we look at asset inventory, understanding the organization, the information security posture of the organization, stakeholders and participants, and context establishment. So here is where we look at asset valuation. So having understood and discovered the assets and your cloud assets in totality, we look at the vulnerability and threat identification and then present risk treatment plans for them to mitigate against the risks in their potential or operating cloud environment. So again, we would look to the likelihood and the impact and assign an asset a score. So potentially your CRM system, as mentioned, might be moving to a cloud environment. You would step through this process for your CRM system, look at the type of data. As I said earlier, we looked at the classification of the type of data you're looking to put into the CRM in the cloud, and then you would understand your compliance requirements given the Data Protection Act and your industry or local jurisdictional laws, compliance regulations, and what the mandates are, and we would assign a risk score in connection with that. The likelihood also of that data being lost in a cloud environment. Next we look at secure cloud design. This is again your CRM system designed with the cloud model in mind, with security control model in mind, again attributed to one used from your organization, possibly already in place, and finally your compliance model, so whatever compliance requirements need to be enforced. We would also look to implement steps to put mitigations in place at the design phase. So we'd understand the risk already, we'd understand the model, the security model and compliance model, and then we would look to put mitigations in place. So the likes of user access, we would look at security information and event management, we would look at cloud discovery and control, we would look at identity and access management, privileges, and we would also look at encryption and how to best secure that data in the most granular way. So this is all built into the secure cloud design phase. Next we move on to the intelligent cloud migration. This is where your CRM system is ready, you're ready to push the green button on your migration and actually move your CRM system or data into the cloud environment. And this can be anything from a software platform or infrastructure as a service model. The same level of assurances need to be gained in order to migrate properly. So we look to have defined the assets, assign the risk score, and then you're looking at the CRM being the fish who's moving from one environment to a new environment, and you need to design the actual security around it. And in this phase we're carrying out the migration in a secure manner. So we're building and enforcing the security controls, be it technical, policy and procedural, around the asset to ensure that it is protected to the highest standard while at rest, in transit and in process in the new environment. So the outcome of this is your CRM system operating in a secure cloud environment, which has been done in a secure manner. So this is really intelligent cloud migration, reviewing the business benefits, reviewing the assets, reviewing the security controls, implementing the security at rest, in transit, and in process in the new environment, and making sure everything is operating to the agreed levels. Next we move on to the cloud testing and audit phase. This is an integral part where you iteratively test and audit your cloud service in its new environment. So your potentially CRM use case up in your cloud environment needs to be tested for a whole gamut of different areas. So you're looking at interoperability, multi-tenancy, performance, and security testing. And this can, as I mentioned earlier on, can be software, platform, or infrastructure as a service. You still need to be able to what's called the right to audit your own cloud environment, because essentially you're entrusting your biggest assets to a third party, essentially a cloud service provider. You should be entitled, and this has to be ensured from the SLA perspective, that you're entitled to test and audit your cloud environment. The likes of penetration and vulnerability assessment will also be included here from the security perspective, but not just solely these. So you look at everything from performance, load balancing, stress testing, and so on to make sure your cloud environment is operating as agreed. Next we move on to incident response. So incident response is totally evolved in a cloud environment. Roles and responsibilities need to be defined and mapped out from the outset, from the SLA right through the risk assessment all the way into the cloud journey. But it doesn't just end there. Your incident response plans, policies and procedures, roles and responsibilities need to be defined throughout. So you'd look to the traditional preparation, detection, containment and eradication, and post-incident activity. And this is critical to know in your SLA and your terms and conditions with your cloud service provider what the entitlement is and who's responsible for what. Otherwise it can have huge legal ramifications further down the line. And again, our service is all built around risk. We look at the event, the vulnerability, the incident and the breach. And having understood your environment, we will be able to apply the correct incident response procedures to mitigate any risk. So because you have taken a risk-based approach from the outset of your cloud journey, you're able to respond in the correct manner. Next, we move on to the cloud service provider assessment. And this is really a separate function that we offer for both customers and cloud service providers, whereby we audit to the Cloud Security Alliance's CCM Cloud Controls Matrix. These are a series of 14 different domains rating your cloud service provider and giving them a compliance score on how they're actually performing. And it's a hugely important tool in assessing and giving you assurances that your cloud service provider is performing the way they have agreed. The controls are derived from guidance mapped to familiar frameworks such as ISO, COVID, PCI and so on. So they help bridge the cloud for IT and IT auditors and give assurances of how your cloud is performing. So again, it's all down to the CSA STAR certification and how aligned, what percentage they are aligned to it. So again, the Cloud Security Alliance are one of the industry-defining leaders as a non-profit organization in giving guidance. Espion have a member and many chapter members on their team. The benefits of cloud assurance are risk identifier reduction and transference, improving security posture and compliance and confidence. Essentially, confidence is what it's all about. Assurance that the cloud service provider is performing as expected in all manners, from performance right through to security, and also adhering to industry leading best practices across the board to gain confidence from the assurances you're getting. So we can help with the assessment, design, in the actual migration on the technical side, testing and audit as an iteratively, and cloud incidents response. We can also provide cloud service provider assessment for customers looking for assurances from their cloud service provider to make sure everything is as expected and to get the due diligence that's been imposed upon them, and also for cloud service providers to prove to their customers that they're actually performing as securely as possible. That's effectively Espion's take on cloud assurance, and these are the core services that we offer individually but also as part of a much more granular journey across the cloud, into the cloud, and operating in the cloud on an ongoing basis. We provide industry defining tools such as identity and access management, SIEM, right through the managed portfolio of your cloud environment. So I hope that was worthwhile, and we'll open up now to a bit of a Q&A with myself and Nigel. Okay, thank you everybody. So that's a good overview of SkyHigh and Espion's cloud assurance journey. I've had a few questions in from a number of people. The first one, Nigel, is for yourself really on what implications does cloud have in particular for compliance and meeting these EU regulations that you've mentioned, and why is it so important to do a risk assessment at the start of a cloud journey?
I think that the answer to that question is that cloud is being used by your employees whether you know about it or not. And that doesn't mean that you're not responsible anymore for the data. You're still responsible for the data wherever it sits. You may, over the last decade, be worried about data sitting on your internal servers, data being emailed out of your organization, and data sitting on people's laptops. Now you have to realize that data can also sit in the cloud, and that even though it may go out there without you realizing it, you are still responsible for the safety of that data. So you need to look at the cloud services that are in use by your users. You need to look at the risk profile of all of those. You need to also look at the actions that the users are taking to make sure that you are not held responsible for any data that may well be lost.
And it's quite a complex journey as well, I would stress. So it's important that you do look to external help on information security professionals like ourselves and industry leading defining tools such as SkyHigh to be used together to bring control over the cloud environment. That's really what we're all about and the partnership we have. And that's really the message we're trying to get across. I suppose just another question that's here, Nigel, that you might actually feel. PCI DSS, obviously you guys are familiar with that. How do you think that's impacted by the new EU data protection law, and should really customers gear up at this early stage? Obviously the EU are bringing in this Data Protection Act over probably the next 12 to 18 months, but should companies look to gear up and prep up for this directive now, or should they kind of wait until it actually comes in and a bit later down the tracks?
I believe that you should start work now. In fact, maybe now is too late. You should have started yesterday. That might sound a bit flippant, but it's never too early to start. And actually, the drafts haven't changed much, and so I think most people expect that there aren't going to be major changes between now and when the legislation gets finally published. So we've got enough information to start planning now, and if you're the first organization that has data loss after the regulation comes out, I don't think that an excuse of I didn't work on planning for this will really be understood by the regulators.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's fantastic. So I will actually open it up. I'll send on a link to a Q&A email address at the end of the webinar to follow. But I'd like to thank Nigel now for his time. A very informative session, and appreciate all of your time today. And we look forward to hearing from you. And please forward on any of your questions. Thank you very much, and good day.
Thank you.
Please feel free to make contact, and you can email your questions on to myself or Nigel directly if you have any questions or require any further information about SkyHigh or Espion's cloud assurance services and solutions. Many thank you. Good day.